I feel like I say this every time I do a Sonible video, but Sonible is a company that I've been really interested in because I've always liked the idea of really trying to expand what the digital world can bring to audio, not just necessarily emulating analog stuff, which I think that there's a lot of merit to emulating analog stuff, but we have a digital medium, let's push some boundaries. So in this video, I want to start by saying that in the past, I had no endorsement relationship with Sonible. I know their marketing people. I've known their marketing people. They've sent me beta stuff before, and I've been happy to demonstrate those products because I like them. From this point on, I'm officially endorsing Sonible, so I am now getting paid for transparency's sake, but I was doing it when I wasn't getting paid, so I think that tells you what I think about it. I also like the fact that they tend to focus on the needs of the people buying their product, not necessarily putting the idea forward in terms of like, what do we think is going to sell? It's more like, what do we think people need? So this is kind of an example of that because they sent me the smart limiter before it went to market, and I tried it. And I decided not to do a demonstration of that particular product because there's so much going on with that product. I wasn't going to have time to actually learn the product in order to demonstrate it the way I would want to demonstrate it. I typically demonstrate things in terms of how I use them or how I anticipate using them. And because there was so much going on, I didn't feel like I could put that together. I think that Sonible kind of sensed that with some of their customers and decided to put together a really simplified version of the smart limiter called Pure Limit, and that's what I want to show you today. So I'm going to play a little bit of this record down. This is a record where it came in this morning and I have to get it out today, so I'm making the video and doing the work at the same time, which is why this video is coming in a little bit later in the day. But basically it's for a TV commercial, and this is pretty normal for TV commercial schedules. It's more or less sounding pretty good, so I don't feel like I'm going to need to reinvent the wheel on this, but one of the things I'm going to have to do is get it louder. So I figure, what a perfect opportunity to demonstrate a limiter. All right, so the basic idea of this is it's working on the smart AI functions that Sonible has been incorporating into their products over the last bit. Basically, it allows you to record a snippet of whatever you're working on into the limiter, and then it's going to guess the settings that are going to be most appropriate based on genre. So I'm going to first throw on a trim plugin on the back end here because I don't want this to get overly loud for anybody. And now I'm going to pop in here. I've selected the genre electronic. I mean, it's negotiable what this is, but I would say electronic is probably the closest. So now I'm going to hit this and hit play. Okay, so now it's given me a set of settings that it believes is going to sound best for the source material based on what genre I've prescribed it. Whenever we're setting a limiter, by the way, I really highly recommend you go to the loudest part of the record. So I've selected kind of the chorus section where it's got the heavy kick drums and snare, and then also most of the instrumentation, because if we set our limiter in a place where we don't have, say, heavy kick drums, we're going to end up pushing it way harder than we should. So, okay, we've got 9.6 dB of gain, and we've got this little inflate thing set to 10, and the action of the limiter is set to hard. So first thing I'm going to do here, oh, look at that. I almost guessed it spot on. So let's turn that down to -9.6. We could just really quickly A/B with and without. So let's start without. Let's hear it again one more time, and then I'm going to stop it, restart it with. So the best way to evaluate what a limiter is doing is to listen to the heaviest transient material, because that's going to be the stuff that gets most affected, and that's going to be the kick and the snare. So what I'm really focusing on here is how do the balances seem to change? and how does the tonality of things seem to change? And there's a little bit of trade-off there, because if the perceived dynamics of something is being retained by a limiter that's being pushed hard, chances are there's going to be some distortion artifact. If there's some distortion artifact, there's tone change. If there's no change, there's probably less transient. So it's a little bit of a negotiating spot. Let's start by just kind of focusing on the snare real quick. Okay, now with. And we can hear that the snare is being affected. We can hear that the transient is being kind of pancaked down a little bit, and that the apparent balance of the snare has been set back. In terms of the tone, however, I don't really hear any tone shift in the snare or any mid-range elements at all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of focus on the kick drum, which is going to be probably the most affected element by a limiter. So once again, before and after. So again, I think I'm getting kind of the same thing. There's some heavy pancaking action going on here. The transient is definitely being sort of squished down. But in terms of any kind of like distortion or clipping or tone shift or harmonics or anything like that, I feel like it's pretty darn identical. If there's any kind of distortion or whatever, I'm not really hearing it. Now, I do feel that overall this is maybe pushing things a little too much. On the one hand, I can see why it would interpret an electronic genre as wanting to be like, this is clearly very stuffed into the limiter. Like, this is really probably the RMS on this is probably like -6 or something like that. And so I think for EDM, that makes a lot of sense. Because this is more of like a television commercial, I don't think that we really need to push it that hard. And we're going to get ultimately better results by backing off the overall push. So I'm going to back it off like 2 dB. And let's see if that feels a little bit better. Let's also set our trim right there. And now let's play it again. Yeah, that feels really good to me, because it feels like the snare is staying about in the right balance kind of range. There is a little bit of transient rounding, but it's not like I'm missing transient here. And the kick is also getting a slight degree of rounding, but there's still actual physical excursion of the low excursion of the low end. And I'm a particular fan of that. In my style of mixing, I need this speaker cone to actually move a little bit in the low end. So I feel like that's pretty good. Now, there's a couple other little settings that we can play with. I think this hard style is probably going to be appropriate. This is kind of meant to retain the most of the transient image. I also reckon it's probably the most distortion version, because it's probably just a harder limiting style. There's no onset of the limiter. But if there was any distortion, I wasn't really hearing it. For funsies, we can switch it over to soft and see if that feels better. Yeah, basically it's just really how much definition are we getting on the transient and how much distortion are we getting as a result. Personally, I'm not hearing really anything that's throwing me off in terms of distortion, so I like having that leading edge on the transient. So I'm going to keep it that way. Probably more pronounced if I were to push it a little harder. This other control is really interesting. This is kind of like a broadband saturator, kind of low-level compressor thing. Maybe there's an EQ thing kind of tied up. It's basically a louderanizer. Yeah, yep, you heard me. And it produces very interesting results. I'm going to start turning it up on the mix, and we're going to hear how it starts to change things. So there's a noticeable broadband saturation. It's pretty smooth. I actually don't mind it. The only thing I don't like about turning this up so much is that it starts to make the record feel almost a little bit overly congested. But I think from where we had it, we can actually push things a little bit more. And we might actually be able to improve the sound while at the same time making it louder. So it's not even necessarily just for loudness sake, but just for maybe making something feel a little bit fuller or bolder. And as I push this up, I'm thinking, well, maybe I can gain the actual limiter back down. And then we can get something that's even a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more punchy. So let's match these. There we go. And let's do a quick little before and after here, and then I want to move on to another little use case, one that I think I'm going to be doing quite a bit, actually. But last before and after on the overall mix real quick. I think that sounds great. I think that not only have we made the overall record much louder, but I think it actually sounds better, which I think is nice. That's kind of cool, because usually there's a lot of compromising that goes into making a record loud. Okay, another use case for this that I think is really, really useful with a reduced format version is for things like drum loops. I've got a couple of drum loops right here. There's like this kind of kick and percussion loop right here. And here I'm going to push the limiter. I scanned it in because that's how this works, but really this is about pushing the limiter, and just so that it kind of like ever so slightly grabs the very, very top transient. It's almost too quick to hear. It's almost too little gain reduction to even really notice. And then really take advantage of that inflate control, because I think it sounds kind of cool. Here's our before and after. Before. So you start to really hear that low-level compression in the pump kind of vibe. I think it works really well for this loop, actually. One more time. These are level matched, by the way. And in the mix, which is the most important way to before and after something, it sounds like this. Before. After. Kind of cool. It really fattens up that low end, and I think especially for like EDM in particular, being able to use a limiter that has this built-in kind of like multi-saturator, compression, louderinizer, pumper thing makes it very useful on loops, kicks. You know, I haven't tried it on synths yet because I just got it, basically, but could potentially work on some synths and things like that. So I see this not just as something that could be used on Mixbus or for printing a final master, but also something that could be used in the mix, which as a mixer, primarily, that's pretty important to me. One more time before and after with this in the middle here. Let's try it from like here. Right on. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap up here. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe, but with the bell notification so you get notified. Still have just a couple weeks left on the low-end guide, which is free if you sign up for the WeissAdvice newsletter. So a couple weeks, take advantage of that. And lastly, you know what we say here at WeissAdvice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.